Okay, this video is on something called employing a vertical lookup. So, in the prior two lessons, we've learned how to do a few things. We first learned how to create an if formula, which basically said, well, if this happens, then the computer will spit out this thing, and if it doesn't happen, it'll spit out that thing. So just to quickly review that, I can type into this cell equals if. So let's say if this cell was greater than or equal to my passing score, which I need to freeze, then I'll say you passed, great, and if not, I'll say that you failed. Sad face. We can even put it in sad face. Sad face. There it is. Okay? And I can scroll that down. Okay, great. And I can see all these kids passed, but Dolce Cronin got a sad face. Okay. Now, let's say I want to make it more complicated. Let's say I want not just that you passed or failed, but I want your letter grade. Well, there are lots of options for letter grades. And that's what if formulas don't do for you. They don't allow you to have more than two options. Unless you get very complicated and you can actually have if formulas inside of other if formulas. But that gets a little messy and complicated. What we do have for this purpose is something called a lookup table. All right? So I'm going to delete this formula. And before we do anything, I just want to determine what the letter grade should be. So our letter grade ranges at Blindbrook, and this is fairly common. All right? So I just want to put letter grade ranges here. Okay? From 0 to 64.5, that's an F. So if you get a 64.5, people tend to round that to a 65, and then you get a D. So from 64.5 to 69.4, that's a D. Because then at 69.5, people tend to round up to a C minus. So 69.5 rounds up to a 70, that gives you a C minus. So between 69.5 and 72.4, you get a C minus. Okay? And then at 72.5, that bumps you up to a C until you get to 76.4. That's a C. All right? So 76.5 up to 79.4, that's a C plus. Okay? 79.5 to 82.4 is a B minus. 82.5 puts you in that B range out to 86.4. And I'm just putting this kind of in reference for us. 86.5 rounds up to an 87. That gives you your B plus. To 89.4, you get a B plus. 89.5 to 92.4 gives you your A minus. 92.5 to 96.4 gives you an A. And the 97, whoops, sorry, an A, and that keeps auto-filling for me. And then 96.5 all the way up to 100 is an A plus. There's my letter grade ranges. Okay? So what we want to do is actually create a table that will look up the minimum range grade and report back the letter grade. But before we do that, what I want to do is actually determine the letter grades to make sure that we understand. So here's us. I'm going to say we're hand determining, meaning we're doing it without the spreadsheet capabilities, letter grades. Okay? So hand determined, maybe I'll put in there, hand determined letter grades. So if I was doing this by hand, I would say 93, okay. 93 is between 92.5 and 96.4. This kid should get an A. 77, that's between 76.5 and 79.4. That kid should get a C plus. And 83, all right, that grade is between 82.5 and 86.4. That kid's going to get a B. And I'm just going to do this for a few of these. 82, that grade's between 79.5 and 82.4. That kid gets a B minus. I'm just going to do it down to the 61. 77 is a C plus. 85 is a B. 81 is a B minus. 82 is a B minus. And 61 is an F. Now, if I had a huge data set, which I do, I have 120 some odd students every year, this would be a huge amount of work to do by hand. So what I want to do is create a handy-dandy formula that will actually do it for me. So here's the first thing we need to do. We need to establish the bottom score for each of the ranges. So for the F range, the bottom score is a 0. So I'm going to put a 0 in, and that's going to correspond to an F. All right? My input is a 0. That's my bottom score, and that corresponds to an F. Then at 64.5, if I get a 64.5 or higher, I'll get a D. But then if I get a 69.5, I'll get a C minus. But then if I get a 72.5 or better, I'll get a C. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the bottom of my range and I'm matching them up to a letter grade. So 76.5 is my C plus. 82.5 is my B minus. 86.5 is my B. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm wrong here. 79.5 is my B minus, my bottom of my B minus. 82.5 is a B. That's my minimum grade to get a B. 86.5 is my minimum grade to get a B plus. 89.5 is my minimum grade to get an A minus. 92.5 is my minimum grade to get an A. And my minimum grade to get an A plus is 96.5. And I am going to actually just kind of highlight this chart for now. I'm going to put some borders around it. This is my grading chart. In other words, these are my minimum scores. This is my minimum score and my letter grade for that score. Okay? That's my minimum score and my letter grade for that score. So, what we're going to do is something called a vertical lookup. In other words, we're going to trick the spreadsheet into scanning this column and reporting back the grade that it produces. So what the spreadsheet's going to do is it's going to look at these scores and it's going to say, okay, which one of these numbers is it surpassing? Okay? It's going to look to say which one of these scores is it closest to, but without going over. It's kind of like Price is Right rules. So a 93 is closest, okay? A 93, I should say these scores we don't want to go over. So a 93, for example, is closest to a 92.5. It just goes over 92.5, all right? So this should report back an A. So here we're going to have a letter grades column, and here's how the formula works. It's a little complicated. I'm going to type in E equals V lookup. That stands for vertical lookup. Okay, and it actually gives me the format for the formula, but it's a little hard to follow. It does tell me what the search key is, the value to search for. So I want the computer to search for 93 in my table. So I'm going to hit 90. I'm going to hit the 93, which is C2, comma. Then the range. The range is the range to consider for the search. In other words, I'm going to be looking in the table that I created for that value of 93. So this basically highlights that you're going to highlight the table that we're using. We're using this table right here. We're using the G and H table. So I'm actually going to highlight the entire table. And I'm going to remember that I want the table to be frozen. The table's not going anywhere. So I'm going to put $signs in front of my G in 6 and H in 16. That's the range of the table. Comma, index. Index is the column index of the value to be returned. That's fancy language for, if I'm looking at this table, I have two columns. I have my number column and my letter column. Which column do I want the spreadsheet to give me back? Well, I don't want the score. I already have the score. I want the spreadsheet to look up the score and return back to me the letter grade. In this little table that we have highlighted, the letter grade is in the second column. So I'm going to put a 2 in. That's the second column. Comma. So this range is sorted, and I'm not going to be able to find a 93 in there. So what I'm going to do is, this is a true or false argument, and this is a little complicated, but it indicates whether or not the column is to be searched whether or not it's sorted, in which case the closest match will be returned, meaning the closest match that it goes over. So I'm actually going to put true in here, all right? And I'm going to press enter, and lo and behold, I get A. By the way, if you put false in here, let's just see what happens. If you put false in here, what happens is I get an NA, an error. It did not find 93 in the evaluation. Because what happens is if you put false in here is that it's looking for the exact value. In other words, it's not true that the data isn't sorted. So anyway, we're going to put true back in there. Okay? And now, okay, it has returned A. Now, if we drag this down, if we look, this actually returns C+. And notice what moved. C2 became C3. If I compare top to bottom, that's a good thing because I don't want it looking up C2 again. But the table has not moved. That's exactly what we wanted. We wanted the table to be frozen. It's still recurring the row 2 entry, and true just means it's looking up the approximate value. Whoops, I don't want that happening. So that little error I just made, I just pressed escape to get out of it. And now I can just click and drag, and I have all of my letter grades. Isn't that pretty cool? I have all my letter grades, and I can just see if it matched my hand-determined letter grades, and it does. Okay? And this is yet another way we can get Excel to make, or Google Sheets, and this is exactly how it works in Excel, to make some decisions for us. So now I'm going to ask you to watch the third video where I describe what you're going to do in your college spreadsheets to actually make some decisions. Thanks, guys.